The Ed Sullivan Theater was buzzing with that familiar, electric anticipation reserved for nights when a blockbuster star graces the late show stage. Josh Brolin, ruggedly charismatic in a charcoal suit with an open-collared white shirt, stepped out to thunderous applause, flashing his trademark half-smile as Stephen Colbert rose from behind his desk to greet him. They shook hands warmly at first, the cameras catching the brief exchange of pleasantries as they sat down. The segment began as Many Doe Colbert asked about Brolin's latest project, an intense neo-Western streaming series that had critics raving, and Josh responded with easy charm, sprinkling in wry humor and self-deprecation. The audience was engaged, laughing at his anecdotes, leaning in when he spoke of long days on set and blistering heat. But as the conversation shifted from work to broader topics of Brolin's career longevity, his upbringing, his occasional run-ins with controversy, something in the air subtly changed. Stephen, who is known for his quick wit and occasional needle, leaned forward with that mischievous glint in his eye and said, "You've been in this business long enough to see how Hollywood changes people, broken bar including yourself. Do you ever look back at some of your public moments and think, maybe I went too far?" Josh chuckled lightly, but his eyes narrowed just a touch, as though weighing whether to give a canned, safe answer or something more biting. "Define too far," he said, his voice even but edged with challenge. Stephen, undeterred, brought up a few instances from past interviews and pressed terse moments where Josh's bluntness had made headlines. "You've been called a refreshingly honest," Colbert said with a grin, "and also a broken bar, well, a little intimidating. Which one do you think you are tonight?" The audience laughed, but Josh's smile thinned. "I'm just me, man," he replied. "If that's intimidating, maybe that says more about you than me." The laughter faltered slightly, replaced by a low murmur of intrigue. Stephen, sensing the shift, pushed again, mentioning not just past candor, but a recent podcast appearance where Josh had openly criticized certain studio executives by name. "Bold move," Colbert quipped. "Some might say career suicide." Josh's brow furrowed. Or maybe it's just telling the truth when nobody else has the guts to. The applause that followed was mixed, some loud, supportive claps, others hesitant. Stephen's smile was still in place, but there was a sharpness to it now. "But isn't there a line?" he asked. "A point where telling the truth turns into picking a fight?" Josh leaned forward, elbows on knees, and locked eyes with him. "If someone feels picked on because you told the truth, maybe they should take a look at themselves instead of the person holding the mirror." The tension was palpable now, the audience leaning forward like they were ringside at a prize fight. Stephen, perhaps half in jest but also testing boundaries, replied, "Well, I hope you brought that mirror tonight, because I'm curious what you'd say about me." Josh smirked, then, after a brief pause, said, "I think you like poking people until they react, and then you act surprised when they do. That's your thing, right?" The audience reacted with a mix of gasps and awkward laughter. Stephen's eyebrows lifted, and for a moment, he seemed genuinely caught off guard. "Ouch," he said, smiling but with a flicker of tightness around his eyes. Josh sat back, not breaking eye contact, and the air in the theater shifted again from playful banter to something heavier. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was two men testing each other's limits on live television, and everyone in the room could feel that the stakes had just changed. Stephen leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming lightly on the edge of his desk, the glimmer of amusement in his eyes now tempered by something more measured. "That's fair," he said slowly, "but you've got to admit if you dish it out, you have to be ready to take it." Josh tilted his head, his expression hovering between agreement and skepticism. "I've been taking it my whole life," he said. "Difference is, I don't hide behind a desk while I'm doing it." The audience let out a collective "ooh," that strange mix of delight and discomfort that live crowds can't resist. Stephen chuckled softly, but there was an unmistakable bite in his tone as he responded, "Well, at least I don't storm off movie sets." The air in the room dropped a degree, and you could almost hear the inhale from the crowd. Josh's jaw flexed, his eyes narrowing just enough to register the jab. "You want to go there?" he asked. "We can go there, but if we do, you better make sure you've got your facts straight, because I won't sit here and let you recycle gossip as if it's the truth." The band's leader, John Batista, shifted in his seat, glancing at Stephen with a look that said, "Maybe we should cool this down." But Colbert pressed on, bringing up a notorious incident from a few years back in which Josh had allegedly clashed with a director over creative differences. "That's not gossip," Stephen said. "That was widely reported." Josh leaned forward, his voice dropping into that low, deliberate register that makes you pay attention. "Widely reported by people who weren't there, people who think they know everything because they read a blog post or saw a tweet." His gaze didn't waver from Stephen's face. "You ever think maybe the truth is a little messier than the headlines?" The audience was dead silent now, sensing this was no longer a performance. Stephen, trying to steer the moment back into the realm of late-night humor, said, "Messy makes for good TV, though, don't you think?" Josh shook his head. "Messy makes for dishonest TV if you're not careful, and I don't play that game." There was a pause, the kind that feels longer than it is, before Stephen leaned in and said, "You know, for a guy who says he's not afraid to talk, you sure seem ready to shut things down when the questions get tough." Josh's response came with a sharp laugh. "Tough questions I can handle. Loaded questions meant to bait me into a headline, not so much." A murmur of approval rippled through part of the audience. Stephen shrugged, glancing at the camera as if to say, "What can you do?" "Well," he said, "we wouldn't want to make you uncomfortable." Josh straightened in his chair. "I'm not uncomfortable, Stephen. I'm just not going to sit here and let this turn into something cheap." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, and somewhere in the control room, a producer's voice crackled over the comms, "We might need to wrap this segment early." Stephen glanced toward the audience, then back at Josh, as if deciding whether to double down or back off. "All right," he said, his voice taking on that faux conciliatory tone late-night hosts sometimes use when the banter has gone off the rails. "Let's change the subject." But Josh wasn't about to let the exchange be brushed aside like a momentary hiccup in the conversation. "No," he said, his voice firm, "you started these, let's finish it." The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and uneasy laughter, sensing they were witnessing something unscripted and raw. Stephen, perhaps feeling cornered, gave a small smirk and said, "Well, I didn't realize you were so sensitive." That single word, a sensitivia, hit like a match in a dry field. Josh's eyes narrowed, his posture tightening. "You think speaking up for yourself is being sensitive?" he asked, the word sharp but deliberate. "You've been around long enough to know the difference between thin skin and calling someone out when they're twisting the truth." Stephen leaned forward, elbows on his desk, as if matching Josh's intensity. "And you've been around long enough to know this is a comedy show," he countered. Josh gave a humorless laugh. "Then maybe stick to comedy instead of taking cheap shots at people who show up here in good faith." The audience gasped, a few voices calling out in support, others murmuring with nervous energy. In the wings, a stagehand took a small step forward, sensing this could go south fast. Stephen opened his mouth to respond, but Josh had already begun to rise from his chair. "You know what," Josh said, adjusting his suit jacket with measured precision, "I'm not here for this." The studio's energy shifted instantly as some audience members leaned in as if not to miss a single detail. Others whipped out their phones despite knowing they couldn't record. Stephen tried to diffuse it with humor. "Come on, Josh, don't leave me hanging here. I've still got 2 segments to fill." But Josh was already unhooking his lapel mic, the thin cord trailing from his hand as he set it neatly on the desk. "I think you'll manage just fine," Josh replied, his tone flat but laced with finality. He gave a small nod toward the audience, who responded with a hesitant smattering of applause, before stepping away from his chair. Stephen watched him, still smiling, but his eyes betrayed the irritation bubbling underneath. "Josh," he said, "the door's always open." Without breaking stride, Josh tossed back over his shoulder, "Not sure I'll be walking through it again." The audience reaction was immediate: cheers, gasps, and that strange, electric buzz that comes when live television takes a sharp turn into the unpredictable. Josh made his way toward the side of the stage, the band falling silent except for a single, uncertain drum tap that sounded like punctuation on the moment. Just before disappearing into the wings, he turned slightly, offering a polite wave to the crowd. Then he was gone. The moment Josh disappeared into the wings, The studio seemed to exhale in a chaotic mix of relief and disbelief. Stephen sat motionless for a beat longer than usual, his trademark smile still on, but it no longer reached his eyes. The band struck up an uncertain riff, clearly unsure if they were supposed to fill the silence or let the tension linger. "Well," Stephen finally said, adjusting the papers on his desk with exaggerated precision, "that was a broken bar something." The audience reacted with a murmur of laughter, though many were still whispering to each other, replaying the scene in their minds. In the control room, producers scrambled to decide whether to cut to a commercial early, but Stephen, perhaps determined to keep control of his own show, signaled to keep the cameras rolling. "Live TV, folks," he said with a wry grin. "You never know who's going to stay a broken bar or who's going to walk." The audience laughed more loudly this time, though it carried a note of catharsis after the uncomfortable exchange. Backstage, Josh was already moving quickly toward the stage door, trailed by a publicist who alternated between hushed pleas and urgent instructions about damage control. A stagehand caught a glimpse of him muttering something under his breath, something about not playing that game and not selling out for a laugh. Within minutes, clips of the walkout began circulating online. Someone in the live audience had managed to sneak a recording, and even though security had been vigilant, the shaky footage made its way to social media before the next segment aired. The hashtags #Brolin walkout and #Colbert clash trended within the hour, with fans and critics alike weighing in. Some praised Josh for standing his ground against what they saw as a needlessly confrontational interview. Others accused him of overreacting on a comedy show. Entertainment blogs churned out think pieces dissecting every facial expression, every pause, every subtle shift in tone, while late-night rivals couldn't resist making sly references to the incident in their own monologues. Stephen, for his part, returned from commercial with his usual polished charm, cracking a few jokes about guests getting their steps in and moving briskly to the next segment. But those in the theatre and anyone watching live via knew they had witnessed something that wasn't part of the script. By the time Josh was spotted outside the theatre hailing a cab, the night had already passed into the realm of late-night lore, destined to be replayed, debated, and mythologized for years to come.